You Can't Kill David Arquette is the new documentary about David Arquette and his passion for wrestling. I didn't know David Arquette had a passion for wrestling, and I didn't know David Arquette did a program with WCW. Now, back in the day when I was a wee young lad, I only watched WWF. Now it's called WWE, but I watched WWF during the Attitude Era with guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Undertaker, Mankind. Those are the legends to me. Side note, I do watch a little bit of wrestling today. I love AJ Styles. Baron Corbin is nice. Samoa Joe when he wrestled. Now he's just doing commentary, but he was cool too. Finn Balor's cool. So I like a lot of the new wrestlers as well. But the Attitude Era is my jam. So back during the Monday Night Wars, and us wrestling fans refer to the Monday Night Wars as the rivalry between WCW and WWF during the peak of the 90s. Now, apparently, David Arquette was on WCW and he won the WCW championship, and a lot of fanatic wrestling fans were outraged about this. I didn't even know this happened because I wasn't a WCW fan. I was a WWF fan. The only glimpse of WCW that I really got was occasionally I would watch WCW Thunder, but then I would always change the channel after 5 minutes because I felt like every time I watched WCW Thunder, these fools were just talking all the damn time. There were barely any fights on there, so I got bored with it and I stopped watching it after a while. But that's the extent of my knowledge of WCW. And then when Vince McMahon bought out WCW and then they had the whole invasion angle, that's pretty much my extensive knowledge of WCW. But having famous people in wrestling programs happens all the time. We have Donald Trump who fought Vince McMahon. We have a ton of celebrities. We have Drew Carey who entered the Royal Rumble and he eliminated himself. He tried to bribe Kane with money and then he jumped out the ring. So we have celebrities coming in all the time, wrestling matches and all that stuff. But I didn't know David Arquette was a part of wrestling for a little while and he won the WCW championship. Now, watching the documentary, it seems that wrestling fans, fanatic wrestling fans, people who are deep and passionate about wrestling were super pissed off that this Hollywood actor just comes in to the business and wins, you could say, one of the most prestigious championships in world wrestling. And that's understandable. Even David Arquette even understood that. When in the documentary he said, you have these guys who give their blood, sweat, and tears to this, literally, and their knees go out and they're 40 years old, and then you have this other guy doing an interview talking about how, yeah, man, you know how many holidays I missed with my family? I missed Christmas, I missed Thanksgiving, I missed all these holidays to be with my family. I was out there wrestling. And you got this Hollywood celebrity just coming in here, winning the most prestigious championship, and then, that's like a spit in the face to wrestling people. But then watching the documentary, it's understandable because you look at David Arquette, they show an old photo of David Arquette when he was a young lad watching an Andre the Giant match. So this dude is a wrestling fan. He is a fan of wrestling. He's not just some random Hollywood dude who comes in there and tries to disrespect anybody. I don't think that was his intention. Because when you watch the documentary, you have DDP. And I saw DDP once. He came to my junior high, and this is when in the WWE he was doing this whole crazy angle where he would smile in this weird way with this side smile where he looked like a psychopath. But I saw him one time, and he gave us a speech about doing drugs and how drugs are bad and all that kind of stuff. And then I watch interviews about DDP where people are like, yeah, he got a lot of people off of drugs. He got some wrestlers off drugs. He has DDP yoga. So it seems like he's living his best life while he's also helping people. He's giving back at the same time. So from what I hear, DDP seems like a cool dude. And in the interview, DDP's like, Put yourself in David Arquette's position. You're a huge wrestling fan. You've been a fan of the business for a long time. All of a sudden, Eric Bischoff, Ted Turner, they invite you to one of the world's most biggest wrestling programs. And they say to you, you're going to win the most prestigious championship. You're going to be the WCW champion. And DDP's like, would you say no if you were in his position? Even David Arquette, from what DDP said, even David Arquette was like, it's kind of weird. But he accepted it, because that's what they wanted. So he went with it. And then the beautiful thing is when you watch the end of the documentary, there's this guy during the credits who says that when David Arquette did that program for WCW and won the WCW title, of course David Arquette got paid for that. He got compensated. But he took his money, David Arquette took his money and gave it to another person. He gave all his earnings to somebody else. And that guy was like, David Arquette will forever be my family, because David Arquette gave this guy all of his money. So that's what I'm saying. It's like, for me personally, I don't care about celebrities' personal lives. Whatever happens in their personal life happens in their personal life. That's their business. All I care about is the art. But with this documentary, it paints a picture of David Arquette, and it feels like the real him. And I respect David Arquette. I respect him as a human being after watching this documentary, because before this documentary, I never really paid attention to him. I barely pay attention to any celebrity. All I care about is the art, like I said. But with this documentary, he seems like a really just cool individual where you can just hang out, have a drink, and have a great conversation, have a lot of fun. He doesn't seem like a jerk or anything like that. He seems like a really cool person. Because he was a huge wrestling fan, and he did what he did, and everyone's like beating him up about it, and all he wanted was respect. He wanted the people to respect him, so that's why he went on his journey to become a wrestler. And I respect that, because he put in the blood, sweat, tears, and dedication that the wrestlers have. He did all that in order to prove himself that he's worthy to be labeled as a wrestler. And by the end of the documentary, they say that he was labeled in the category of out of 100, he was labeled out of 100 people, he's labeled out of one of the greatest wrestlers. And that's a huge accomplishment. And I respect the guy for that, because when you watch this documentary, you see scenes of him just getting his ass whooped. People throwing weapons at him. He's bleeding all over the place. Like, there is one horrific moment where he's wrestling in a death match, like some ECW shit. And he gets hit with this light bulb, or this glass, and it cuts his neck, and it seems like a deep puncture wound, to where his neck is just gushing blood. And he had the balls to continue the match. Like, at first he walks out of the ring and he's like, I don't know. You can tell he's thinking about it. Like, you can tell he's kind of upset and he wants to leave, but then he gets back in the ring and he finishes the match. And it was the way they have the music play in there, and the way he acts, and what you see, it's kind of horrifying. But this guy put his life on the line just to get respect from these fanatic fans who are disrespecting him because he was a fan of wrestling, and he came in there and he won a WCW title. It's like, I can understand. He even understands it. Like I said, he even understands it. Like, yeah, this people live their lives for this. They sacrifice so much, and I'm just a regular guy who comes in here and takes all of that away. But to the levels that people went to of just constantly mistreating him for one fucking thing, and then not knowing what went on behind the scenes of how he gave all of his earnings to somebody else. That's truly commendable. He was being selfless while trying to have fun at the same time. And when you watch the documentary, it just paints this picture of this guy who was looked at the beginning of his career as like one of the guys who was highlighted in Hollywood, because there's a scene where they say that, or his current wife says that he was on this magazine cover with like Leonardo DiCaprio and Will Smith, and this is before those guys became huge A-listers. But he was on the cover with these guys, and he could have been that. But unfortunately, due to circumstances, you could say he's not in the same ranks as like a Will Smith or as like a Brad Pitt and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, when I first caught wind of David Arquette, I saw Scream. When I watched Scream, that's when I knew who he was. I never saw any of his movies before then. Or it could have been one of those cases where you watch a movie with an actor in it, but you don't recognize them until you see a movie of theirs in the future. And then when you go back and watch their old movies, you'll be like, oh, I didn't know they were in this thing. So it could be that case too. But for me, I didn't know David Arquette existed till I saw the first Scream. And then I've seen all the Scream movies up to Scream 4, and he's great as Dewey. But then, like they say in this documentary, ever since then, they always typecast him as like the doofus character. And I saw Eight-Legged Freaks, and as a kid, I thought Eight-Legged Freaks was great. Right now, I haven't seen it in a long time, so I can't give you my opinion about that. But it's really kind of sad because then it's like, he in the documentary, he says that he hasn't had work for like 10 years. Recently, he was in this movie that came out this year called Spree, which is a good movie, and I highly recommend it. But yeah, man, like just watching this documentary, I have a respect for David Arquette. I respect that man because he earned it. He put in the blood, sweat, tears, and work. He fucking earned the respect of not just wrestling fans, but from people in general of what he'd been through. This documentary makes me respect David Arquette. So overall, I love this documentary. I really fucking love this documentary because it shows me the life of this man who seems like a really good person who was just dealt a bad hand, and people from the outside looking in are judging him based off their own opinions, and they have no idea what's going on behind the curtain. And he's just having fun. He seems like a guy who just wants to live his life and have fun. Like even in the documentary, he says he loves kids. He loves the way kids see the world. And inside of his heart, he's a kid at heart. And that's beautiful. He seems like a really cool guy. Like I would hang out with him. Like there's another scene in the documentary where he went to I don't remember exactly what sport it was, but it was a game of some sort. And he had an extra ticket. And he walks up to this guy who had a Sandy Hook t-shirt on. And he's like, hey, you got a ticket? And the guy's like, no. And he's like, hey, you want a ticket? And they became best friends ever since. Watching this documentary, David Arquette seems like a really cool guy. And it hurts me that he received all the flack that he got from people who know nothing about him, from people who are on the outside looking in and just pointing their fingers and judging him based off of their own opinions. And I cried multiple times throughout this documentary because I really felt for the guy. And then when he gets redeemed, he put in the work. He put in the blood, sweat, and tears. He proved himself to get that respect. I think he earned it. So if you're a wrestling fan and you are talking shit about him and you don't respect him at this point, I think there's something wrong with you. That dude was wrestling death matches, nearly got killed in the ring. The dude at the beginning had fucking people putting thumbtacks on him. He's getting his ass whooped. He put in the work. He paid his dues. He not only talked the talk, but he walked the walk, as DDP said in the documentary. If you can walk the talk, then hey, you're in. And that's what he did. So not even just as a wrestling fan, you should respect him, but as a human being, you should respect him. And I respect him. Because he earned it, man. He put in the work. And not just as like him putting in the work as a human being. He just seems like a really cool person that doesn't want a problem with anyone. But if you start the problem, it seems like he'll finish it. He ain't no punk, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, he seems like a really, like as they say, a down-to-earth guy. That's what I take away from this documentary. I love this documentary. I love David Arquette as a human being. I respect him even more now after watching this documentary, and I wish nothing but blessings for the guy. That's all I have to say.